Hello to Purple Corner, which is a little corner of J 2024. And we have with us Divrina Dhingra, who's been a writer with Elle, Vogue, and some of the most prestigious culture magazines and publications. She's out here talking about her latest book, which is fascinating. It's the Perfume Project, Journeying Through India's Fragrances. And what an unusual book. What It's one of those things that you maybe at the back of your head you think about, oh, India's fragrances, but to put that information together, can you tell us a little more about that journey?
Thank you. I'm going to start off by saying that the journey was an inordinately long one. It took me many years to do this, but really it was born out of my own curiosity and an interest in fragrance that I study and continue to sort of dabble in, and I want to study further. And beyond that, it was just, it was a pleasure really, because I got the chance to travel and document what is happening in with Indian fragrance now, how similar or different, to see how similar or different it is to what was happening maybe centuries ago, and discovering, to my delight, in some cases there isn't that much difference, and of course that there is. Yeah, that in the sense that when you go to Kannauj, you're seeing a kind of distillation that has been in continuous use for hundreds of years. Just a very basic hydrodistillation, but they continue to follow this tradition. They're very, in that way, it's sort of resistant to switching. But then in other parts with the other ingredients, you see how much more modern it is and things like that. So it was a real pleasure to be able to do that, to travel, to go to parts of India that I'm pretty sure otherwise on my own steam I would not have done. Yeah, so that's how that happened.
That's also the journalistic thrill. I think you get access, or at least a reason to go to places that you don't otherwise would get to. But I'm interested in two main things. One is the challenge of capturing scent in word. It is one of the most tangible sense. It's one that has not been replicated. Sense is something that you can't even think of technology replicating it. That's that one barrier that has not been able to, you cannot be crossed by tech. It's food, touch, sense of smell. Those are such human things that stay analog today. And to then use the power of words to evoke that. Um, was that a challenge for you? And as just purely from a craft and writer's level, how did you navigate that?
Yeah, so I think, you're very right that there's no, I'm sure there are digital forays into trying to replicate these experiences, but as humans, you experience the world through your senses, and most certainly through your sense of smell, even though I feel it's one that we take it for granted, because you breathe involuntarily, and so you kind of smell involuntarily as well. So you end up taking it for granted. To evoke that in words was sometimes a challenge, just in terms of choosing my words quite carefully, because I have studied fragrance a little bit. I come to it having maybe already some sort of vocabulary that comes from the lab. And so for me, the challenge was in the writing to always sort of remember that that might not be the most accessible vocabulary for other people reading it, because I think I would tend to forget that. But at the same time, descriptions of smell, there are no inherent words. You always borrow from your other senses to describe it, and so I just did my best, and hope that like you get the point across, knowing that everyone has their own experience, but you hope that you can bring them to where you are.
Speaking about the research a little bit, um, my assumption is, and I could be wrong, but that there isn't much literature on. There may be practices like you mentioned that are still ongoing, but did you have to rely on any kind of secondary research, and what the difficulty in documentation, when it comes to any kind of historical tradition, scale, etc. One of the things that a lot of writers have spoken about is that documentation is lacking. There's a lot of effort that goes in corroborating sources because everything is an oral tradition. Did you face similar challenges?
No, not that much. I would not say it's an oral tradition. There is a lot to read once you start doing the research. There are entire olfactive treatises, from the 12th century, from the 11th century. We have a very long tradition of fragrance. It's not all, in some cases, of course, there are entire treatises that are devoted to fragrance. I couldn't access all of them, and partly because a lot of my work was done during the pandemic, and so I had hoped to be able to travel more to other libraries to access primary sources, and that wasn't possible for me to do. I wanted also to go to the British Library because I think they would have even more sources in which may not be dedicated to fragrance, but you always have to put that effort in, read other texts maybe, and you'll find mentions of something like fragrance doesn't really have. Yeah, I mean, because most of those would be dedicated to maybe statecraft or politics. Those are easier to find, but within those you always find mentions of sort of cultural practices of the era, and so that's the research really. That's the effort that you have to put in. There's some digging, and I did, and then partly, of course, so apart from the fact of the pandemic and sort of restricted movement, many of those treatises would be in Sanskrit or in Pali, or in the Dakkani, and in languages that I would not be able to access. And so you're right, and I did rely very heavily on secondary sources, and did a lot of reading there in order to get the research right.
That always makes me think about how much more digitization, the pandemic, I think, has revealed how much more digitization of our resources and libraries is still required, because access becomes so difficult, and that just makes it so much harder for anyone passionate about any subject to bring it to the public as well. I have to end. Of course, it's a book about fragrances, and what is your favorite go-to fragrance? What is your smell? What is that one thing that identifies you identify with as Divrina Dhingra?
This question comes to me often, and I think disappointingly have no one definite answer because I'm pretty agnostic in the sense that I will keep switching the fragrance. And currently I'm not wearing anything, and I realized when I reached Jaipur that the one thing I have forgotten to pack, I remember the woolens, and I remember the books I wanted signed and everything, and I did not remember to carry any fragrance. um, yes, and I think that's what tends to happen, is that it's created an expectation with readers, and I fail to meet that all the time. So I will say that in the 6 ingredients that I wrote about in the book, I think my favorite is probably vetiver, khas, because it's I think when you're living in Delhi and living in North India, it's sort of always there in the summer, and you have a lot of associations with it, and it's very beautiful. So that I can give you that much. Unfortunately, that's it.
I think that's good enough. But it was really funny that you forgot it in the perfume. But thank you so much, Divrina. Sorry.